The Cipher Brief, because national security is everyone's business.
I'd like to welcome Glenn. Glenn, of course, is a CIG principal, and he is the former general counsel of the National Security Agency. Glenn is an incredibly forward thinker on issues of cyber, and if you don't follow him on LinkedIn, you really should. He publishes a lot of the content there that you see from the New York Times. I mean, you name it, every publication out there always listens when Glenn talks. And then Matt's going to come back on camera here and join us as well as we welcome this next panel. Now, Jeff was going to join us, and I think he might have some trouble logging in here. Jeff Sindel, he is Vice President and General Manager at Honeywell. But we are going to welcome Andrew Howell, who is partner.
I'm good on, I'm here, my audio is working. I'm not sure about the video.
Okay, we've got you, Jeff. So we can hear you. We're having some video issues, but we'll see if we can sort that out. So I'm glad to have you here. Welcome to the conversation. And Andrew Howell is partner at the Operating Tech Cyber Coalition Group, and he is also joining us to talk about this topic. So with that, Matt, I would love for you to hang out if you don't mind, because as you said to me in text a few minutes ago, who can give up a great conversation about operational technology?
Absolutely.
So gentlemen, I'm going to turn this over to you. Glenn is the moderator of this session. Thank you so much. And I will be taking notes as we go. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Suzanne. And it's just been terrific to see this program already unfolding so far with some just absolutely terrific experts. And following Bruce is a bit of a tough act, but I think we'll rise to the occasion with some I hope some insights on operating technology. And I think we've got Andrew on also. I can see him okay, and Jeff, you can indeed still hear us. Is that right?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Okay. Well, perhaps in an excessive bout of verisimilitude, we're getting an illustration into the difficulties of operating technology with your not being able to connect by video, but I assume that's just inadvertent. So we'll be happy to listen to you. You know, maybe the best way to start this off, since we're focused on operating technology, is for me to just tell you about something that caught my eye about 6 months ago. You know, there are all these headlines about we're about to brace for a cyber war and ransomware attacks have increased by X% over year, et cetera, et cetera. But one headline jumped out at me in the midst of all this, and I'll just read it to you. It was that a cyber attack on operational technology has the potential to cripple 83%, the overwhelming majority of United States organizations and businesses, according to a poll of 100 leading enterprise security leaders commissioned by a big cybersecurity firm. Well, that's pretty scary. And I know, again, we've had lots of headlines about the nature of cyber risk. We've just spent an entire morning talking about risks to operating technologies and how cyber can be used in warfare. We heard General Petraeus and Dmitry Alperovich talking about the Ukraine situation. Bruce just talked about the possible role of artificial intelligence in creating havoc for our future. So we're going to add to that list, hopefully not inducing panic, but just add to that list by talking about operating technology. And let's first sort of establish a baseline to make sure we all understand, because maybe not everybody in the cyber world is familiar with the distinction between operating versus informational technology. So Jeff, let me turn to you and ask, can you just give us a sort of basic overview of the distinction, and then we can get into layers of that, of why it's relevant, how it's relevant, and what some of those distinctions are.
Sure, and apologize for the lack of visual. I'm still working it, but no luck. But let me start from the top. So when we talk about operational technology versus information technology, OT is all about the software and hardware that are used to control physical devices and processes for both industrial systems and critical infrastructure. And you can think of it as IT lives in the carpeted part of a institution, and OT is in the uncarpeted, if you will. So we're talking about all of the And you may have heard these industrial control systems, SCADA, PLCs, and others that are being used around the world in industries to basically control and actuate physical processes and physical objects. And a key distinction between cybersecurity for IT and OT is explained by what's called the cybersecurity triad, and some of you may have heard of this, or the CIA triad. And in IT cybersecurity, the real focus is on protecting information. And the order of priority, if you will, top to bottom, is confidentiality, that's the C, integrity, the I, and availability. Confidentiality is of the utmost importance in keeping an organization's trade secrets, data, and all the rest private. Integrity is all about ensuring that data is correct, it's authentic, and it can be trusted. And then finally, availability is access to that data. When it comes to operational technology or OT cybersecurity, the priorities are flipped and reversed, which really has significant implications. Availability is the top priority. The systems must continue running, production must continue in a safe, secure, and reliable manner. And that's the top priority when it comes to cybersecurity efforts and controls that are implemented. That's followed by integrity and finally confidentiality. And when we talk about availability, safety and control are incredibly important. So that's a fundamental difference, I would say, between IT and OT, where IT is focused on information and confidentiality. OT is all about production, uptime, reliability, and availability.
Okay,
and
great.
And I can go into some specific differences if you want, or I didn't know if you wanted to comment before I talk through that.
No, I think that's good. Let's pause there for a second. I guess probably the sort of bumper sticker answer to the question maybe is that operating technology controls things in the physical real world, whether it's sensors, valves in a chemical plant, or electricity, or water valves, or who knows what, but something in the real world with real world consequences. And whereas information technology is much more about just that, information, data, et cetera. Not that they're both, not that one is more significant than the other, but they do have different consequences. Before we get into sort of why that's the case, or the distinguishing features about that, let me just make sure that, I don't know if Matt or Andrew had any further comments also. We can sort of make this a little more conversational.
Matt, do you want to add anything? If not, I've got one thing I'd add, but okay. Matt, I'll defer to you.
Yeah, so hearing the operational technology definition really rattles home when you start talking about everything we heard 5 years ago about smart cities and about how we were going to leverage all these control systems everywhere we could put them. And getting that security in place isn't the same as we're trying to protect sensitive documents and things like the like. So I think you did a great job of really laying that out. But that the future is going to have just more and more compounding sensors and operating technology everywhere in things we wouldn't have imagined today.
And I would just add one thing, because it's another interesting piece of context, and Jeff, you probably have a thought or two on this too. Is that as you look at this kind of paramount importance of availability, you're also looking in the operational technology world at a fundamentally different life cycle approach here, right? Where these pieces of technology are in the field for years, if not decades, as opposed to in the IT space where things are updated, daily, weekly, monthly, annually. And so seeing pieces of technology in the OT space that have been in an operational environment for many, many, many years has a whole series of implications. And so as we think through from both the policy and the government and kind of just kind of cybersecurity perspective, understanding that basic fact is extraordinarily important. And some of that is driven by tax law. Some of it is just driven by reality of a factory's operational environment. But Jeff, I don't know if you'd want to add anything that might be particularly timely or relevant.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It is a major stark difference between OT and IT. So as you mentioned, in the OT environments, there is a significant amount of very, very old, outdated technology, often 20 years old or more. These systems also, in many cases, are running proprietary protocols and proprietary software. Whereas in the IT domain, the vast majority of equipment is new or a couple years old. And also they're running on, very popular standard operating systems. So one of the implications of this, it's incredibly difficult to get visibility into these devices and to monitor these devices. And also, many of these devices cannot be updated. There are not software patches available to update them. So it makes the security of those even more complex. So it's a major difference and a major challenge when you're talking about these environments. They're outdated. They're oftentimes proprietary. They're complex. You cannot deploy cybersecurity controls and technologies on top of them as you would in an IT environment. And again, in many cases, there's limited or zero visibility into what's happening on that device.
I think you all make some great points. There are some sort of fundamental intrinsic differences between the information technology systems, which we know are so vulnerable because we've seen the kinds of cyber hacks and attacks that have been aimed at them over the past, decade or two in any real very, very significant sense. But on the operating side, I think you point to some fundamental differences which are just intrinsic. They're inherent in that. It's not something that we can say, oh, we just need to spend more money and fix it or whatever, or it's too bad we've made this choice. We have to do that. So what I specifically mean by that is when a company is going to buy a particular type of a piece of equipment, a heavy piece of equipment, whether it's a robot on a shop floor or a type of valve that controls an industrial system in a chemical plant or an energy system, we want that piece of equipment to be durable and to last 20, 30, 40 years or more. Electric motors are designed to last decades. The software and the control systems that accompany them must attach to that same life. So we're in a situation where, because of the operating technology, we're doomed, so to speak, to be dealing with something that's going to have a very long lifespan, not just the typical few years that your laptop or cell phone or a PC may have. So that's
Glenn, I would just add on that. I mean, one important other piece of context that I should have mentioned earlier, is a lot of these systems, they're built for one reason, and that reason is safety, right? Safety and availability, as Jeff mentioned, are absolutely paramount here, right? And so safety tends to be mission one. Safety tends to be what's regulated in these areas, and therefore systems are built to be safe. And as everybody who's on this call knows, safety and security are two different things, and especially in an operational environment. And so figuring out how we evolve that point of view in the operational context is extraordinarily important and absolutely essential to figuring out how we improve cybersecurity in the operational technology space.
That's right, and that goes to, again, the sort of fundamental difference here. I guess I'd also add one or two more, which is one in particular, which is by its inherent nature, so many of the sensors and control systems and other aspects of the digital control here of operating physical systems are specifically designed to be interoperable. So if you have a sensor that measures temperature, pressure, what have you, number one, it's probably going to be pretty basic and not designed with cybersecurity in mind. It may be too small or too cheap because of its usefulness to have any kind of built-in cybersecurity in the first place. But most specifically, it's designed exactly to be interoperable with a wide range of proprietary equipment from manufacturer A, B, C, or D. Because if you're going to install one of these sensors in an oven or in a valve or a pressure chamber, you want it to be able to work with any one of several different kinds of systems that might be employed rather than just one uniquely. So that very interoperability is a vulnerability because it enables someone to get into something that isn't specifically designed to be airtight with just one road for entry. So that's another sort of inherent problem in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add to the discussion, a classic example is, so while reliability and safety are the top priority, we'll go on to shop floors and sites and you'll have sticky notes with passwords and usernames written on them. so that should there be an incident or an issue, yep, somebody can immediately access that system to take action. Well, obviously that's a massive vulnerability that could be misused. It's just another example of what goes on in these environments and the challenges. And I would say, increasing the importance for cybersecurity to be embraced and more widely deployed in these critical infrastructure and industrial environments.
Yep. And then the last point, and I'll shift topics, but I do think, Jeff, you make a good point about the sort of the operating environment itself. You talked about shop floors with sticky notes with passwords, which is the human element is so important here because the operating technology is used to deal with things in the physical world, the manufacturing world, the processing world, et cetera. The kind of workers who are dealing with it every day are not going to be necessarily the ones who have a sophisticated cyber education. They're going to be the people on the shop floor, and they're not going to be getting the benefit from the CISO sitting in the executive suite, who may have a greater level of experience and skill in dealing with cyber matters. So there's an important human element that we need to make sure we take into account in this area too. Let's move a little bit from sort of why operational technology is different and how and what the vulnerabilities are into what the future looks like a little bit in this area. We all see the Internet of Things coming at us fast and furiously. Maybe we'll start with Andrew in this area. What's your sense of whether we're positioned? We'll get into government regulations in a minute, but just sort of the industry perspective. What's your sense of whether we're well positioned to deal with the onrush of the Internet of Things? We're going to have 5G connectivity. We've already talked about earlier the importance of artificial intelligence, although in a different sense that Bruce was raising. But we're seeing a whole bunch of things come together that are going to increase the potency and potentially the vulnerability of operating technology. How do you see the future unfolding in this area?
Yeah, I mean, this is the most interesting part of this whole conversation from my perspective, right? Is looking forward here, because as we look forward and we started this operational technology cybersecurity coalition with Honeywell, Clarity, Forescout, and Nozomi Networks and Tenable, about a month and a half ago. And this largely to do this very thing, Glenn, that you mentioned, which is talk about what the future is going to look like. How can we better secure operational technology systems so that the manufacturing base, that the broader business communities, that the U.S. economy is more effectively protected. And as we look at this, right, there really is a nice set of coherence with the NIST cybersecurity framework and operational technology, because you really do need, if you're going to secure operational technology systems, to follow that same framework of identify, protect, detect, and respond, right? And as you mentioned earlier, and as Jeff has also kind of talked about, understanding that the identify problem here is non-trivial. But the good news is, once we launched this coalition, we've talked to dozens of companies who are doing really interesting, innovative work to try and solve these problems, because industrial users of all types and sizes realize that we need to do better. They look at ransomware attacks around the world taking place, taking systems offline, and causing real business damage. And as a result, there is a tremendous amount of innovation that's being poured into this space. And as we as a coalition look at those dynamics, right? a lot of activity, particularly as it relates to ransomware, a lot of innovation kind of taking place. You know, we have developed this effort to try and push kind of operational technology policy to be very aligned with the cybersecurity framework and focus on, you know, standards-based, interoperable, innovation-pushing solutions that enable, you know, these difficult to secure systems to be able to be better secured. And you know, as we are working with you know the founding companies and as well as many others, that's really what everyone has kind of wrapped themselves around or wrapped their heads around is, you know, adopting an ecosystem that supports following the CSF and embracing interoperability and standards-based solutions, because that's how we see the future here being used to actually secure these systems that are otherwise difficult to secure.
Well, yeah. Speaking about how they're difficult to secure, and I'm gonna go to Jeff to talk a little bit about what an actual attack on an operating system looks like and how you can deal with it and prepare against it, defend against it, and maybe recover from it. But before I do that, let me just stick on this future point here, because I think Andrew, you mentioned a good point about the nature of attacks we're going to see in the future. And I think the thing that bothers me the most, and I'm sure others as well, is that unlike attacks on information technology, which basically involve theft of intellectual property or tying up a computer for a short term in ransomware, you can always go out and buy another computer, or hopefully you have some backup. They produce temporary problems, although still quite significant and with an economic cost. Nobody gets killed and nobody dies, and so far that has been the case with cyber, thank God. But in the case of attacks on operating technology, we could certainly see the potential for loss of human life, not just economic damage, but actual loss of human life, because we're now dealing with things in the real world. We got a little taste of that with an attempt and an attack on a water supply utility in Florida that didn't succeed. There was several other potential attacks that were caught earlier against some operating technologies, ranging from a Middle East petrochemical plant several years ago to make a more relevant example, attacks on the Ukrainian electric grid in 2015 and 2016 by Russia, which produced havoc in Kyiv and elsewhere, but as far as we know, didn't lead to loss of life, thank God. But you could see the potential for that, and that of course is quite concerning. And so that's maybe an extra reason why we need to worry about operating technology. And the last comment I'll make on that is that, you know, some people say, well, gee, there are 52,000 water utilities in the United States, and attacking all of them at scale is going to be difficult. And therefore, one of the good news points, so to speak, about operating technology is that it's hard to attack thousands of thermostats all around the United States, or it's hard to attack thousands and thousands of water supply companies or pipelines or whatever. And that's true. There's some safety in numbers in the variation and differentiation. But all it would take for a determined foreign cyber adversary is to, say, attack the water supply in one or two places, couple that with some disinformation about the extent of the attack, and then you'd have everybody in the country, hopefully this never occurs, really being concerned when they turn on the tap, gee, I wonder if my water utility company was hit also. So there is certainly the potential for both physical damage as well as sort of psychological and political damage. Let me go back now to Jeff, and using that as a baseline, sort of talk about what does an attack look like? How does someone get into an operating system in the first place? How long do they linger? How do they know what buttons to push or what valves to turn on? And then how can you defend against it? There's no backups. You can't have data backup. Could you give us a little picture of that difference?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about it, and it ties together both the discussion about where the future is heading and kind of where we are in the present.
Yes.
I'll talk through some of those challenges, and then give you a couple. I'll give you an example in particular, and talk about the Oldsmar plant. You know, one of the greatest challenges that exists today is that operators don't have visibility into their cybersecurity vulnerabilities, threats, and don't have an understanding of what risk they're facing. There's unmanaged assets that are connected everywhere in these plants. In many cases, there's multiple and on an ever increasing basis number of remote connections into these facilities. Those are being used by the company themselves, are being used by contractors, they're being used by vendors whose equipment is on site. And we often find, what I'd call a spider web of unmanaged, uncontrolled, secure remote connections. And it's only getting worse with the number of IoT devices and others that are being deployed. And if not done securely in a managed way, can open another attack vector into that environment. So part of the problem is the lack of visibility and an understanding of what the risk posture is. So a good example of that was the hack on the Oldsmar, Florida water facility. That was in February of last year. And a hacker basically was able to access and use a dormant remote access software platform. So I talk about this spider web of remote access devices. In this case, it was a platform that had been deployed, hadn't been used. The operator didn't have knowledge that it was even in place. That goes back to the lack of visibility. And in this case, it was a TeamViewer, which then that hacker used to try to poison that water supply. They used TeamViewer to access the site. They actually got on the control system. Unfortunately, and thank God, the operator was sitting in front of a screen, and the mouse, literally the cursor, was moving about the screen and clicking here and there, and he wasn't taking action, which gave him insight into the hack. When we talk about the future and what could be done to eliminate these types of attacks and minimize the vulnerabilities and threats, it's very important that these operators deploy industrial grade secure remote access solutions that provide, a single pipe, if you will, that's managed, that's controlled, that can be granted access literally at the per IP, per device level by protocol. That's an example. The other is if you have the appropriate monitoring software and solutions in place. Honeywell provides something called the Forge Cybersecurity software suite, and there's many others out there. But there are solutions that can detect unauthorized installed software like TeamViewer here at Oldsmar, and others that are doing that are monitoring the traffic on the process control networks on a real-time basis. So the good news, I would say, is that there's a number of different solutions out there that have been developed, and I would say best-in-class operators are deploying to gain visibility in these environments, to control remote access, to monitor what's happening in the environments and more. But this is an example of something that's very, very, very simple. And I don't know the details, and I don't think it's been revealed. But this access to this site could have just as easily been granted by doing a search using Shodan. That's a search engine that's looking, basically crawling the world looking for internet connected devices. And a hacker just sitting at home literally can leverage Shodan, find an IP address, find an access point. Once they get in, then they may snoop around. In this case, they were able to get in using TeamViewer. And then it's just, there's all kinds of different approaches they can take. But many of these sites have flat networks. Everything is connected. And if you get access into a water treatment plant like this one that doesn't have sophisticated segmentation and cybersecurity controls in, they could have access to the crown jewels.
Glenn, I would just add one thing there. As we look at this issue from a coalition perspective, and one of the things that has really, I think, brought this issue home to people in the cybersecurity space of late
two things, right? Number one is, you've seen the National Security Council work with some sector risk management agencies to conduct a bunch of 100-day sprints on, cybersecurity of operational technology systems, in pipeline and electricity and in water. But I think that that has clearly created a great amount of additional awareness of the need to better secure these systems and the need to kind of really bring to bear all of the innovation that's taking place in the American kind of economy for this. But it also, Colonial Pipeline, let's not kid ourselves. Colonial Pipeline really raised awareness, unlike I think a lot of other examples of cybersecurity attacks, of a real world consumer impact of a cybersecurity attack, right? Because all of us who live on the East Coast, all of a sudden, for no good reason, really saw panic gas buying, saw long gas lines, all because people were afraid of what the consequences of that attack might lead to, gas rationing and gas shortages. And so it has created, and Oldsmar is an even better example that is, gets to more homes, right, and potentially more citizens of the need to do better here, because if you look at the 50,000 plus water authorities across the country, many of them are 1- and 2-person operations, right, where you don't have anything resembling a CISO. And Matt, you can think back on your technology experience and over time, and think about a 1- or 2-person water authority in a rural part of the country. You can't expect that person to be up to speed on everything from a cybersecurity perspective, because again, their orientation is safe water drinking. It's not a cybersecure system, right? And so figuring out how you reorient that community to a certain degree, or bring greater awareness of the things like authentication and all this for granted is a bit of work, and something that we're trying to raise awareness.
So all good points, and since we've got just about 5 minutes, I'm going to go back to Matt, and back to, maybe we'll end up back with Andrew again. And we've sort of explained a little bit about the differences and the significance between operating technology and information technology, and now we've explored the vulnerabilities and in those areas, and also touched upon the future risks. Let's wrap up with what we can do about it specifically from the government point of view. And Matt, given your experience, let me turn to you and ask, where do you see the government moving in terms of regulation, more centralization, more sector-specific regulation, something more mandatory, or more just voluntary guidance? Particularly in the area of operating technology, we've had a very, very strong specific guidance come out from CISA about one particular vulnerability. Are we going to see a steady cascade of those, or what's your sense of where we need to go with the government? And then Andrew, will wrap up with you.
So the good news is that the JCDC just, and for those that aren't familiar with, this is CISA's group where they bring industry to specific sectors to the table, stood up an ICS specific group. And that is where they're going to take some of the alerts they're seeing, and I'll just fold in some of the questions that were in the chat box over here. We have questions like, if my car needs a software update, where do I find that? And the good news is that CISA's poised to partner across the interagency to get US CERT and others to put that out there in a way that's manageable and usable. At the same time, just as you mentioned, too much noise is a bad thing. And a lot of these industrial control systems are used, just like we talk about software supply chain, they're components throughout a manufacturing process that even the users themselves might not be aware of. And so we have to make sure that when we're putting these alerts out, we're doing it with a contextual way that's actually useful to those that it's landing at their feet. And that's where JCDC comes in and says, okay, manufacturers of these components and partners in industry, how do we best convey that there is this critical vulnerability that we have dire concerns about? Where do we come in and put that thumb on the scale and say, go after this one first? This has the most synergy here for government and partners to knock out a threat. And that's the good news coming forward. And I lean on Andrew and Jeff to kind of say, where else can we see that, whether it's regulatory or government participation?
Yeah, let me, all good points. Let me, quick question with you, still back with you, Matt. Do you see a sense of something equivalent to a software bill of materials being utilized in this hardware area where someone goes out and buys a control device, an electric switch, some kind of control panel to control the robots on the shop floor, and has the ability to understand exactly the nature of the software and the components in it, which they currently do not. They're just buying a black box from a manufacturer.
And I see Andrew nodding on this because I think we both agree that yes, absolutely. The SBOM model applies. Being on the software side a little bit more, I will tell you that it's a little bit tougher to figure out where some of these open source panels are used. But when you talk about physical components, it's definitely something that needs to be inventoried for the sake of vulnerability.
No, and you know, and Glenn, interesting that yeah, SBOM, I think that Matt mentioned is obviously an ingredient here, no pun intended, as part of kind of helping manage risk in the operational technology space. But people, I mean, if you talk to Alan Friedman and some of his colleagues over at CISA, they're already starting to talk about an HBOM, a hardware bill of materials, because that's inevitably part of this conversation too. Is I'll never forget, and a few RSAs ago, there were a series of conversations with DHS leadership over the software supply chain and the hardware supply chain. There were two separate conversations that took place. And at the end of the second one, a panelist astutely noted, we actually need to be having these conversations together, because having a conversation about the hardware supply chain inevitably involves making risk-based decisions about the software supply chain. And I think the same thing ties here to operational technology. Right, we've got to figure out from both a hardware and a software perspective how we kind of build systems today that better secure tomorrow. At the same time, we have to look at kind of all the innovation that's taking place in the marketplace now, so that we can secure yesterday's systems today. And from my perspective, figuring out how we do that in an interoperable, standards-based way is the most important part of solving this problem.
Good. Well, I'm not sure we want to end on the HBOM note, but we'll have to find probably a better acronym for that. But Matt, I know we promised we'd end at 5 minutes to the hour, and I see there are still some questions. I'll let you address that. But I think we've been able in this half hour to highlight some of the differences between operating and information technology, and understand the reasons for those differences, the intrinsic differences, the unique vulnerabilities that are presented, and some of the sense of how the future might unfold in this area. I personally believe that we will see nation states get ever more sophisticated and start attacking operational technology far more than they have information technology in the past, or not far more, but with the same level of vigor that they have put into that, which I think will produce some very serious results. So we have some bumpy roads ahead of us before we surmount this problem. I think ultimately we will surmount the problem, but we're in for a bumpy road in this area. Matt, back to you.
Thank you so much. And just looking at the questions here, we do have one about sort of, let's see if I can just read it out. The table stakes is really the CMM certification model, the NIST 800 series, but potentially other agencies weighing in here. The billion-dollar contractors, what role they play. But many of those contractors have subcontractors without the level of IT support. We kind of talked about like the mom and pop problem, and where are those requirements going to be adjudicated? Is this going to be something where we leverage like larger partners to try and help the smalls? And where is that going to fall in? We want to make sure we're mitigating a big attack, but at the same time, not everybody has the same disposal.
Yeah, look, I would just say on this, the idea of the bigs helping the smalls is something that a lot of policymakers are looking at, whether it's water systems or hospitals. It's like, okay, how do you bring to bear the expertise that a big organization has, so that it helps a geographically adjacent, smaller organization do better? I think this is in the operational technology space. This is a notion that is going to take hold. Again, going back to water with 50-some thousand, water utilities, I think inevitably the bigs will need to help the smalls, and we'll find a tremendous amount of interest in doing that. But I think you can look across the critical infrastructures and see that that's going to be something that winds up probably being a scalable model to help address some of these cybersecurity challenges in the operational technology space.
All right. Well, thank you all. That was a great conversation. I really appreciated it. And thank you for including me. I always like a good ICS conversation because it definitely has the government's attention and gives me great flashbacks to the panic of making sure we are doing what we need to do.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone.